Okay, volume 8. That's where we at. See? Okay. Part 4 still has a ghost shadow on the, but it hadn't been open for 50 years. Okay, part 4, story 3. Jesus unveils the future. Okay. As the disciples talked among themselves about the wonderful things Jesus had told them, they longed to know more about the future. If he was going to leave them, what would happen to them after he was gone? Well, I know, but they don't, because there's a list that'll tell you I have all of them. How long would he be away? When would this present world end and his world, his wonderful kingdom of love begin? At last they found a chance to ask him. One day, while looking at the massive wall of the temple, Jesus startled them by saying, "You see all these things? There shall not be left one stone upon the other that will not be thrown down." The disciples could hardly believe their ears. The temple destroyed? How could that ever happen? Such a beautiful building, too, and so costly. We know who would ever want to wreck it. Perhaps Jesus meant he was going to throw it down himself when he came to set up his kingdom. Or would it be the work of the enemy? They made up their mind to find out. Back at the Mount of Olives, where the little group often met, they asked him, "Tell us," they said, "when shall all these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world?" Jesus told them, drawing back the curtain that hides the future. He let them look into the years ahead. It was not a bit as they had expected. Indeed, it wouldn't be surprised if afterward they wished they had not asked him. Sometimes it was better not to know the future, but to leave it into God's hands. First, Jesus warned them to be on the watch for the false Christ. He said that after he had gone away, one man after another would arise and say, "I am Christ," and claim to have come back, just as Jesus promised he would do. As for the promised kingdom, that would not be set up for a long time yet. "You may hear of wars and rumors of wars," he said, "for nation shall rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in divers places. All these terrible things would be but the beginning of sorrows." Far worse troubles would come to the disciples. They would be cruelly treated. Enemies would put them in prison and kill them. "You shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake," said Jesus. Excuse me. He's begin. Because of all this suffering, many who claim to be his followers would give up their faith and betray one another and then it's got to pause, hate one another. Wickedness would abound and love grow cold. Some faithful ones, however, would never give up. They would endure to the end and be saved. Jesus now began to talk about Jerusalem, which at this moment lay peacefully below them. Great trouble would come upon the city, he said, and soon a foreign army would utterly destroy it. Yeah, it really did. Um, and then it says, oh, it's a Quade. It has Quade written on the bottom, and you can tell it's a different artist. And it's got him pulling back the veil or the curtain, and it has a little town right here, and it looks like it's a graveyard. Bodies going to the graveyard, sick people in a hospital, tanks and soldiers marching, airplanes flying over, a city being destroyed, earthquakes and floods and fire coming down. Even has a railroad. This is the picture. And of course, Jesus is the guy that's right here, and he's pulling back the curtain. And this is the flooding, and then fire here, devastation here, war machines right here, and airplanes up there, and then the funeral, and then the hospital. Okay, see what else it's got for this story. Oh, got more. Okay. Okay. The disciples could save themselves from this disaster by watching for certain signs. The moment they saw the city surrounded by soldiers, they were to flee to the place of safety. They must not delay a moment, not even to pick up a single treasure. Should they be working in the field, they must not go home to get their clothes. Instead, they must run for dear life. Should they do should they do so, they would have just enough time to escape. Then Jesus said a strange thing. He told them to pray that they would not have to flee in the winter or on the Sabbath day. Yeah, because the winter's too cold and you got ice, and they still had ice. They got too cold in the ice. And then on Sabbath, you're not supposed to go very far because according to the religion of the Jews, you're not supposed to go very far. Even on a walk, you're not supposed to go very far. Okay? On that quiet, peaceful afternoon on the Mount of Olives, it must have been hard for the disciples to imagine the scenes Jesus was talking about. Their lives in dear old Galilee had been so peaceful. They had never seen a great city besieged by armies, and the very idea of the holy city being destroyed was frightening to them. Would it really happen? Later, they told the other disciples what Jesus had said, and the news spread like wildfire. Spread far and wide. I put the wildfire in it. my brain sees things, but it's not true. Okay? Many believers began to pray that uh, that their flight might not be on the Sabbath or in winter. No doubt some wondered how they would be able to flee if Jerusalem was surrounded by an army. Or did it, or, okay, surrounded by an army. It did seem strange, come to think about it, but they went on believing that Jesus wouldn't have made a mistake. Of course he did. About 40 years later, Jerusalem was surrounded by Roman soldiers. Recognizing the promised sign, the Christians in the cities prepared to flee. Then, just as they were wondering how they would get through the enemy lines, the Romans mysteriously withdrew. Every follower of Jesus who believed his warning got away. Then the Romans turned and destroyed the city. How wonderful that Jesus would have known all this long, all this so long before it happened. But there, was he not the Prince of Prophets? Back on the lonely hillside, he now began to tell his disciples about another thing that would happen hundreds of years ahead, right down to the end of time. And then, of course, it has um, a catapult, a, 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 a trebuchet. Yeah, yeah. There's a couple of trebuchets and one that has a great big spear on it, and soldiers there, and then a battering ram. Yeah, and I say trebuchets. They're basically catapults, and yeah, they were made back then, even though it's French. And this is the representation of the Roman soldiers destroying Jerusalem. And see, this is the spear, and then a trebuchet here, or a catapult, and another, and uh, a battering ram right here. And that was the end of part 4, story 3. Okay, so I'm gonna take a break, and then I'm gonna come back and gonna finish this out. See you in a minute.